2016 was a huge year in pop culture. On Netflix, we saw the debut of Stranger Things. In music, Justin Timberlake was topping the charts with Can't Stop the Feeling. And meanwhile, over in the WWE, the new face of the company, Roman Reigns, was still trying to get over with fans, all while a legend of the industry made his long-awaited debut and rose all the way to the top of the card in record time. But how did it all happen? Well, join us today as we take a deep dive into the entire story from start to finish in the WWE in 2016, a year in review. When we last left off, Roman Reigns was the WWE champion and finally was starting to win a small segment of the audience over. So with Vince McMahon hoping a corner had been turned, he'd head into the first big show of the year, the Royal Rumble on January 24th, looking to get the big dog even more over by having him defend the title in the Rumble match itself. Yes, for the first time since 1992, the top prize in the company was being fought over in the titular 30-man Battle Royal, meaning anyone could have walked away from it as the new champion. Before we'd find out who did this, though, the undercard saw 3 champions successfully defend when Charlotte Flair retained the Divas title against Becky Lynch, Dean Ambrose got the better of Kevin Owens in an Intercontinental title last man standing match, and the New Day pinned the Usos to keep hold of their tag team gold. Then, once that was over, the main event saw Roman Reigns come out at number 1 as he'd hoped to run the entire gauntlet. Unfortunately for him, though, while this was meant to get him over as a fighting champion, the match saw most fans turn on him once more. Why was this? Well, because he spent most of it backstage with a kayfabe injury. And when he came back out towards the end, the live crowd were not on his side, with them even going as far as to cheer when he was eliminated by the surprise number 30 entrant, Triple H. And with Reigns eliminated then, it left only the Game and Dean Ambrose remaining, with Triple H coming out the winner of the match and now a 14-time world champion. That said, this wasn't the only big moment which came out of the match, because early on in the Rumble, AJ Styles made his WWE debut at the number 3 spot. But while he wouldn't win here, he would do enough to catch the eye of Chris Jericho as, over the weeks which followed, the two would enter into a feud. And that led us into February 21st's Fastlane as there, just weeks after Daniel Bryan gave a tearful farewell to fans, Charlotte Flair was beating Brie Bella in the Divas title match, the Wyatt family were losing to the Big Show, Kane, and Ryback, and Styles and Jericho went one-on-one, with this round being won by AJ. Of course, for as exciting as this was for fans to see, the real main event was still to come as there, in a triple threat match, Roman Reigns, Brock Lesnar, and Dean Ambrose fought it out to see who would challenge Triple H for the WWE title at WrestleMania. And the big dog got the winning pinfall here after almost 17 minutes. And WWE had clearly taken note of how over the lunatic Fringe was getting after this one, so this was why at Roadblock on March 12th, he'd get to go one-on-one with the champ himself. But before we got to the main event of this one, we'd see a stacked undercard where Brock Lesnar would defeat both Bray Wyatt and Luke Harper in a handicap match, Chris Jericho go over on Jack Swagger, and Sami Zayn beat Stardust. And by the end of the night, the Game would walk out on top of his match as he defeated Ambrose by pinfall, with this officially setting up his WrestleMania showdown with Roman Reigns for the following month. Before we get to that point, though, WrestleMania weekend kicked off with TakeOver Dallas on April 1st, a show which saw American Alpha and The Revival have a classic over the NXT Tag Team titles, Asuka win the brand's women's title from Bayley, Finn Balor retain his NXT World title against Samoa Joe, and Shinsuke Nakamura make his WWE debut with a victory against Sami Zayn. Then the following night, the festivities continued when the newest Hall of Fame class were inducted, with this year seeing the likes of Sting, Stan Hansen, and the Fabulous Freebirds take their place amongst the greats. But of course, this was all set up for April 3rd because there, in front of WWE's legit biggest crowd ever, WrestleMania 32 took place. Unfortunately, though, much of the card had to be rewritten relatively last minute for this one after a plague of injuries took out the likes of Randy Orton, Seth Rollins, and John Cena. And in the case of the latter, it meant his planned bout with The Undertaker was scrapped, as instead, the Dead Man took on Shane McMahon inside of Hell in a Cell. On top of this, we'd see Brock Lesnar and Dean Ambrose go one-on-one, Zack Ryder get his moment by winning the Intercontinental title for a night, The Rock make a brief appearance to defeat Eric Rowan in an impromptu bout, and Sasha Banks, Becky Lynch, and Charlotte Flair steal the show when they went to war over the new WWE Women's Championship. After this, then, it came time for the main event where the big dog would win the big one and start his third reign as WWE Champion. And so it was then that the next night on Raw, he'd come out to speak to the crowd, only to be drowned out by an ocean of boos, as fans clearly still didn't want him as their guy. And that wasn't the only notable moment coming out of this episode of Raw, because elsewhere, despite losing his match against The Undertaker the night prior, Shane McMahon was made the new boss of Raw going forward. And in one of his first acts as boss then, he'd set up a match to announce a new #1 contender for the WWE title, a match which was won by none other than AJ Styles. So this would lead us into Payback on May 1st, where just days after Samoa Joe beat Finn Balor to win the NXT World title at a live event, Rosemont, Illinois watched on as Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn took their feud to the main roster. The Miz defend his Intercontinental title against Cesaro, and Charlotte Flair reenact the Montreal Screwjob when she scored a victory over Natalya in the women's title match. Then in the main event, Roman Reigns defended his newly won title against AJ Styles. Still, at least the Phenomenal One got another shot at May 22nd's Extreme Rules, and to make matters even more interesting here, the rematch would be held under no-holds-barred rules. Before this took place, though, the undercard saw both ends of the quality spectrum represented when The Miz, Kevin Owens, Sami Zayn, and Cesaro had a blow-away fatal four-way bout for the Intercontinental title, and Chris Jericho and Dean Ambrose put on the first and only Ambrose Asylum match to date. Of course, neither of these were on fans' minds once the show was over, however, because in a shock moment, after Roman Reigns retained his WWE title against AJ Styles, Seth Rollins made his return and laid out his former Shield brother with a pedigree. Yes, the Architect was back and ready to re-enter the world title scene, but while fans were desperate to cheer for him, Rollins would be playing the role of heel instead. So with this frustrating audiences, as they felt like they weren't being heard, it left a tense atmosphere leading into June 19th's Money in the Bank, where the two former stablemates would finally face off one-on-one. Before we get there, though, NXT put on another instant classic when on June 8th they held TakeOver The End, a show which saw Shinsuke Nakamura's rise continue with a win over Austin Aries, and Samoa Joe's time with the NXT World title keep going when he beat Finn Balor in a steel cage bout. Needless to say then, the quality of this show left the main roster pumped up to put on an even better one a few weeks later, as at Money in the Bank, not only would Dean Ambrose win the titular contract when he bested Alberto Del Rio, Cesaro, Chris Jericho, Kevin Owens, and Sami Zayn in a ladder match, but in a showdown for the ages, AJ Styles went one-on-one with John Cena and even beat him. Then, once that was over, Seth Rollins shocked the world when he defeated Roman Reigns clean. But that wasn't the end of the night, because moments later, Dean Ambrose came out to cash in his Money in the Bank contract, with his victory here meaning that all three members of the Shield would be world champion within 10 minutes of each other. So, clearly needing to settle things once and for all, a triple threat match between each would be booked for July 24th's Battleground. And to make matters even more interesting, this one would determine which brand got the WWE title exclusively going forward. Why was that? Well, on July 19th, WWE revived the brand extension. And during the first draft, the Shield were split up when Shane McMahon and Daniel Bryan picked up Ambrose for SmackDown, and both Rollins and Reigns were moved permanently over to Raw by Stephanie McMahon and Mick Foley. Not that Reigns spent much time on TV over the next month though, because after failing a wellness policy violation, he'd be suspended for 30 days, meaning he'd miss pretty much all of the build to the big three-way match. But that wasn't the only big story heading into this show, as with AJ Styles now having turned heel, a rematch between him and John Cena was booked for the pay-per-view too. Well, sort of, because this time it would be Styles, Luke Gallows, and Carl Anderson taking on Cena, Big Cass, and Enzo Amore in a trios bout. Elsewhere, meanwhile, Sami Zayn and Kevin Owens hoped to put their years-long feud to bed when they went one-on-one once more, with Zayn ending up coming out of this one the victor. And once that was done, the stage would be clear for the main event, as there, in the long-awaited Shield triple threat, Dean Ambrose ended up getting the pin, with him taking the WWE title to SmackDown with him as a result. So, needing a new world title of their own, Raw announced the debut of the Universal title the next night, with this one to be fought over by the top two contenders, Seth Rollins, and new main roster call-up Finn Balor at SummerSlam. But that wasn't the only big news coming out of this edition of the Red Brand, because elsewhere, Sasha Banks finally reached the top of the mountain when she beat Charlotte Flair to win the now rebranded Raw Women's title. And that led us into SummerSlam on August 21st, as there, just a day after TakeOver Brooklyn 2 saw the Revival regain the NXT Tag Team titles against DIY, and Shinsuke Nakamura winning the brand's world title from Samoa Joe, Sasha and Charlotte had the rematch, with the Queen this time coming out the champion. Elsewhere on the card, meanwhile, Chris Jericho and Kevin Owens' bromance began when they teamed up to take on Big Cass and Enzo Amore, AJ Styles scored a massive clean pinfall over John Cena in the match of the night, and Brock Lesnar beat Randy Orton by referee stoppage via elbows to the head. But while this was a big win for the Beast following his return from a fight he had at UFC 200, the night didn't end so well for Finn Balor, because despite beating Seth Rollins to become the inaugural Universal Champion, he'd injure his shoulder in the process, with this meaning he'd sadly have to vacate the belt the next night on Raw. So needing a new champ quickly then, a fatal four-way match was booked the following week between Rollins, Kevin Owens, Roman Reigns, and Big Cass. And to the shock of many fans here, it was KO who walked out with the belt when the Architect's mentor Triple H turned on him and cost him the victory. That said, for as much anticipation as this created for Raw's next big pay-per-view, fans would have to wait for that because it was SmackDown's turn first when they held Backlash in September. And here, looking to upstage their rival brand, the Shane McMahon and Daniel Bryan helmed show put on a card which saw Becky Lynch become the inaugural SmackDown Women's Champion after winning a six-pack elimination challenge, Heath Slater get a blue brand contract when he and Rhino beat the Usos to win the SmackDown Tag Team titles, and most notably, AJ Styles dethroned Dean Ambrose to become WWE Champion after less than a year on the roster. Yes, so impressed was Vince McMahon with the phenomenal one, he'd chosen to give him the ball to run with. But the new champ would have to wait for his first big title defense, because before that, the Cruiserweight Classic, a tournament which saw one-time WWE appearances from the likes of Kota Ibushi and Zack Sabre Jr., held its finals on September 14th, with TJ Perkins coming out the overall winner and new Cruiserweight champion. Then, once that was over, Raw returned to pay-per-view on September 25th when they held Clash of Champions. And on this show, not only would Roman Reigns win the United States title from Rusev, but Kevin Owens would retain the Universal title during his showdown with the now babyface Seth Rollins, and Charlotte Flair would manage to keep hold of the Raw Women's title when she beat both Sasha Banks and a now main roster Bayley. But given Banks hadn't been pinned during this one, she'd demand a rematch the next night on Raw, and when she got this, she'd beat the Queen again to officially become a two-time women's champion. Not that this title run would last for long, however, because at Raw's next pay-per-view, Hell in a Cell, she'd drop it right back to Flair again. Before this happened, though, it was SmackDown's turn as they held No Mercy on October 9th, and on this show, the main matches would see Bray Wyatt score a big-time victory over Randy Orton, The Miz, and Dolph Ziggler create a hidden gem, and the WWE title be put on the line in a triple threat match between AJ Styles, Dean Ambrose, and John Cena. Despite the two babyfaces putting on their best efforts, however, it was the phenomenal one who retained here, so while he began preparing for his next challenger, it was over to Raw, where on October 30th, they held Hell in a Cell. But while this was headlined by the first ever women's cell bout between Sasha Banks and Charlotte Flair, it wasn't the only big match on this show. No, aside from this, there was also Roman Reigns retaining the United States belt against Rusev, Brian Kendrick winning the Cruiserweight title from TJ Perkins, and Kevin Owens successfully walking away from his own Hell in a Cell bout against Seth Rollins, still the Universal Champion. Yes, proving he was more than just a paper champ here, KO was able to rack up another big-time victory. And even if he did have more than a little help from his kayfabe best friend Chris Jericho in doing so, it didn't change the fact he was still on top. That said, at the next big pay-per-view, Survivor Series on November 20th, he wouldn't have to worry about defending his belt, as instead it was time for brand warfare when Raw and SmackDown went at it in a series of bouts. Of course, the night before this took place though, no such brand differences were at play because that was when NXT held another stellar show with TakeOver Toronto, a show which saw DIY dethrone tag team champions The Revival in a classic 2 out of 3 falls encounter, Asuka get the better of a returning Mickie James in the women's title bout, Kona Reeves and Rich Swann end in a no contest, Bobby Roode defeat Ty Dillinger, and Samoa Joe become the first ever two-time world champion on the brand when he handed Shinsuke Nakamura his first loss in NXT. But for as great as this show was, nothing on it quite had the big fight feel of Survivor Series the following evening, as there, in the main event, Goldberg returned to WWE after having spent 12 years away in order to face off against Brock Lesnar. And in one of the most shocking moments in recent memory, not only did he defeat the Beast, but he did so by absolutely squashing him in less than 90 seconds in one of the greatest short matches of all time. Yes, for the first time since ending The Undertaker's streak at WrestleMania 30, Lesnar came out the definitive loser and in the process was left to retreat and lick his wounds. But that wasn't the only notable moment which came out of this show, because elsewhere on the undercard, Randy Orton's newfound turn to the dark side was being solidified when he helped Bray Wyatt score the overall victory during the men's 5-on-5 traditional Survivor Series elimination match. That's right, in the weeks leading up to this, the Wyatt family had taken a keen interest in the Viper and had begun the process of indoctrinating him into their stable. But while this was disappointing for longtime fans of Orton, something which wasn't disappointing was seeing Sasha Banks get another shot at Charlotte Flair on the November 28th episode of Raw a couple of weeks later, where she once again defeated the Queen to become a 3-time women's champion. Meanwhile, as this was happening over on SmackDown, James Ellsworth was being given an official Blue Brand contract after scoring a fluke win over WWE champion AJ Styles. And this meant he'd be in Dean Ambrose's corner when the Lunatic Fringe challenged AJ for the belt at December 4th's TLC Tables, Ladders, and Chairs pay-per-view. That said, rather than help his supposed buddy here, Ellsworth actually cost Ambrose the victory, with his reasoning being he wanted a shot at the gold himself, and since he'd already beaten Styles once, he felt confident he could do so again. But while Ambrose didn't win the title back here, elsewhere on this show, plenty of other belts would change hands, as not only did Randy Orton and Bray Wyatt dethrone SmackDown Tag Team Champions Heath Slater and Rhino, but Alexa Bliss won the big one when she put Becky Lynch through a table in order to become the new SmackDown Women's Champion. And with this being the last SmackDown exclusive show of the year, it meant she'd go into January of 2017 still holding on to this belt. As far as Raw's women's division was concerned, however, things were still very much in flux, as following another Tribute to the Troops show on December 14th, Charlotte Flair was able to regain the Raw women's title again when she beat Sasha Banks at Roadblock End of the Line just 4 days later. So thankfully, the belt began to stabilize for a while after this, and it was also at this time that the bromance between Kevin Owens and Chris Jericho was really getting over with fans. And that was why, when KO defended his Universal title against Roman Reigns at this show, the heel duo were largely cheered over the babyface. Hell, even after Owens won via screwy means, the live crowd rained down love upon him. And when Seth Rollins ran to his former stablemate's aid following that, people weren't having any of it, as they gave Roman a less than fond farewell while he was leaving the ringside area. But at least others were having a better time of things, because in the undercard, Cesaro and Sheamus became tag team champions when they beat the New Day for the honor. Sami Zayn would technically win a match against Braun Strowman by surviving a 10-minute time limit against him. And on top of that, Rich Swann would reign supreme as Cruiserweight champion when he scored a victory over Brian Kendrick. That said, even if Neville was now staking his claim at that very belt, it remained undeniable the Cruiserweight division was struggling. The bigger problem was still the fact that few fans were behind Roman Reigns as the company's top babyface. Could he turn things around? That remained to be seen. One thing which was for certain, though, was that it wouldn't be happening this year, as with the only other notable moment of the month coming on December 28th when Shinsuke Nakamura regained the NXT World title from Samoa Joe, this marked the end of 2016. Yes, this one was a great year for WWE, as with Kevin Owens and Chris Jericho stealing the show every week on Raw, AJ Styles as the WWE Champion over on SmackDown, and NXT on fire, there truly was something for everyone.